We broke a record in Missoula, Butte, and Bozeman. Butte and Bozeman, 45 degrees below zero. That was just the air temperature this morning.
For the last 2 days, the horses and I have been suffering through some brutal sub-zero temperatures. Last night was the coldest night we are expected to have, and the wind chill got all the way down to almost 70 below zero. These temperatures can really affect the older horses that I have, so I'm going to be checking on those guys first this morning. Nigel is still munching away on leftovers from last night, so that's great. The past 2 days I have fed a bunch more hay than I usually do. I've been going through about 600 pounds of hay every day for the horses. During cold snaps like these, I am really grateful that I'm able to secure lots of extra hay for the horses. The continuous bacterial fermentation in their hindgut of this hay is what keeps them warm. Since it was so cold last night, I did put some hay bags out. The hay bags just slow them down so they have food for the entire night. I'm really glad to see Whiplash doing so well. He is 20 this year, and I went back and forth about putting a blanket on him, but it looks like he really didn't need it. It looks like these boys still have a lot of hay left over from last night. When it gets really cold out here, sometimes the horses steam. You can see the heat rising off of little Gus this morning. Stewy looks a little bit stressed, so I'm gonna go get these guys some more hay and then come back and check on all of them. I would have really liked to use my truck to drive the hay around, but both of the batteries died even though I had it plugged in. With it being super cold, it's probably better that I'm moving around and working up some heat. Somebody asked in my last video what I wear when it gets really cold. Today the temperature was 36 degrees below zero. I have on a wool base layer, some fleece lined jeans. On top of that I have some insulated Carhartt bibs, a 650 fill down vest, and I have another down jacket on top of that, along with a fleece neck gaiter, a fleece lined hat, and I'm just actually wearing regular deerskin gloves today. I'm really surprised my hands aren't getting cold, but I am moving around quite a bit. Even though the boys have hay left over from last night, I'm still gonna give them each about 25 pounds of hay this morning. I'd rather them have lots of extra hay left over than them stand around and have nothing to eat. It is kind of wild the way you can see the moisture on the air this morning. There's some low-lying fog that I'm pretty sure is just frozen droplets in the air. One thing I'm checking for when I'm giving these guys their breakfast is to make sure that they're acting pretty normal. Now, last night was incredibly cold, so a few of them are probably going to be pretty grouchy this morning. Pete and Gus are over here eating, and Gus lets me know right away that he's not interested in me touching him. He's usually a pretty friendly horse, so it's a good sign that probably last night was a bit hard on them. I am glad that they both are eating pretty well though. I'm gonna go check on their water to make sure it hasn't frozen over, and it looks like they did drink quite a bit last night, so that is really exciting to see. When it gets super cold like this, I do have electricity to all of the waters. If I break ice, I only break a hole big enough for them to get their nose in. That top layer of ice will act as an insulator. Since that hydrant is not frozen, I'm gonna just fill it back up to the top of the ice and give these guys a little bit of a closer once over. Gus is still pretty grouchy. All of these boys do look like they're insulating quite well with just their winter coats. It is so cold, the moisture from their bodies will create icicles on them. Most of them have icicles on their eyelashes. All of the extra long hairs on their bodies kind of have little tiny ice crystals on them. And then this is a really good sign that they're able to insulate well when they have snow right on top of their back that's not melting. Little Gus has about an inch of hard snow, and that's acting as like a little natural blanket for him. Stewy is acting a little odd, so I'm gonna go shut off the water and then go investigate what exactly he's doing all the way over there by himself. Stewy is one of the toughest little horses that I have, so it's a little bit weird that he is all by himself. It's always interesting to see if the horses eat the hay out of the bags first or the stuff off the ground, and they usually do like to eat the stuff out of the bags first. As I get closer to Stewy, it looks like he's eating frozen grain off of the ground. Last night when I fed them, it was so cold, a lot of their feed buckets actually cracked. All of these horses are getting beet pulp along with their regular ration balancer. And it looks like Stewy was just over here chewing on the ice, trying to get all the little dribbles of grain that the other horses left behind. He is also insulating quite well. Although all of these horses are a little bit cranky this morning, none of them are raising any red flags to me at this point. Stewy even followed me out of the pasture in hopes he might get a few extra scratches. The next horses that I'm going to check on are the ones that are inside the barn. The only one that is locked inside a regular stall is Nigel, and that is because he's small enough he still has enough room to move around and keep his guts going. All the other horses have a run attached to their stall. At this point, I've moved around several loads of hay to the horses outside. Feeding horses in this weather takes a lot longer than it normally does. It looks like all of the horses in the barn are really wanting to get their hay outside today. Although it's still around 40 degrees below zero, the sunshine does offer some relief to these guys. I am really surprised about how much these two horses have been drinking during this cold snap. This was filled to the brim 2 days ago. I have a feeling that I'm going to have to haul water to that bucket when it gets a little bit lower. Since these horses do want to stay outside today, I am going to give them a little bit extra. Even though it's daytime, it's not really an excuse to get stingy on the hay. And it looks like Nigel is just eating away in his little stall. He is so stinking cute in his blanket. Studman was taking a little nap outside in the sun. He seems to be getting along pretty well and isn't too grouchy this morning, which is a little bit of a surprise. It does look like these guys have been drinking a lot of water as well. And the last one that I'm going to give hay to inside is Skeletor. If you guys have been following my channel for a while, you know how outgoing this horse is, and this morning he was super grouchy. I gave him just a few pets and then I'm gonna leave him alone for the rest of the day. I know when this cold snap is over, he'll be back to his cheerful self. When it gets below zero, Tiny hides out in the tack room. I go in and turn a heater on for her every morning and night to warm it up, but usually she just stays hidden and I call her name and she meows at me. She's got food and water in there, so as long as she makes some noise, then I don't worry about her too much. I have been doing chores for about an hour and a half and I'm starting to get a little bit tired. The only horse I have left to feed hay is Scarlett, and I didn't put her in my last video of getting the horses ready. I went back and forth about keeping her in a stall or letting her stay outside. She does not like being in a stall, and she's a lot bigger than she was last year when the cold snap hit. I just thought it was better for her to be outside and moving around than stuck in a stall and being stressed. Before I was done with chores, the GoPro that I was using actually shut off because it was too cold. I made sure everybody had enough hay, they got their mashes, and I topped off all of their water buckets. Here is a good example of the little ice crystals forming on their coat. That's Goose and Whiplash. These two are actually pretty happy. They didn't seem to be too bothered by the weather that we were having. Their run-in shed is in a really good spot, so if you go inside of it, it's usually quite a bit warmer than the temperature outside. I have been working pretty hard the last couple days, and in this weather in Montana, there really isn't an opportunity for humans to take a break. You just kind of buckle down and do whatever needs to be done to keep your animals safe. The temperature was actually closer to 50 below zero this morning, which explains a lot. Sometime during the morning chores, I really hurt my back. I think it was when I was lifting up the buckets of beet pulp for the horses. Once I was done with chores, the pain got so bad that I ended up going to urgent care. I couldn't move my arm and there wasn't a position I could put myself in that was not painful. I was given a bunch of medications and instructions not to do anything for 7 days. I had someone ask on the last video what happens when I get sick, and the truth is, like a lot of other horse people, I can't just rest. This was probably the hardest feeding for me to get through so far. My husband did insist on driving me around. We had talked about finding someone to come out and help me, but honestly it would have taken more energy for me to explain everything that these horses need. So in the end, I just put all the horses' feed in smaller buckets. It took me a lot longer to feed tonight than it had in the morning. I just took it step by step, knowing that if I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, the chores would eventually get done and I could go home and rest. Since all my feed buckets were breaking, I decided to just go ahead and feed the horses on the ground. They didn't seem to mind too much and all of them ate their mash pretty quickly, so none of it froze. I think I probably scared my husband this night because I did have to take a lot of breaks.
Like fingers were frozen.
And even though my body was not cooperating, we finally got done with the night feeding and it was only 20 degrees below zero. Luckily, I was able to go home and rest and get ready for the next day. People that take care of animals in this type of climate do develop a mental toughness. These animals can't feed themselves and are at an even higher risk of problems when the weather gets this cold. It was still only 20 degrees below zero and I did make a few modifications to how I was feeding the horses. Compared to yesterday, it looked like all of them were in much better spirits today. They all have gotten pretty fond of getting their beet pulp. These horses were still making it through the night with leftover hay, so I know they were staying nice and toasty warm even if they still had icicles on their eyelashes. Gus seemed to be a little bit brighter today. And even though I wasn't letting my husband help me actually feed the horses, he was taking great pride in driving me around. This group of horses have been drinking a ton of water. The insulating layer of ice that I've been leaving on top of the tank has been preventing them from getting all the way down to drink water. So last night I did change out their heater for one that was a little bit stronger. Even though I was having a pretty hard time getting around, it did make me happy to see these horses wanting to eat their mash and finishing their hay and drinking lots of water. I don't know if it was the drugs or the fact that I was almost done with chores for the morning, but even when I stumbled upon this water tank that was completely filled with ice chunks, instead of getting upset, I felt grateful that I was still able to take care of my horses at all. I honestly don't know how I would have handled one of the horses getting sick while I was injured. It would have been pretty difficult for me mentally. But as the cold snap continued, things were gradually starting to look up. The horses started having no ice chunks or frost on their coats. I noticed a few of them trotting around to get off some of the extra energy that they had. Even though I was feeding so much hay the last couple days, I was able to feed as much as they needed, knowing that I wasn't going to run out at the end of the year. This morning it was only about 15 degrees below zero and I could see a definite change in the horses. For the most part, they were back to their normal routine, waiting for me to feed them their breakfast. Normally they all kind of wait in that corner for me.
Come on, boys.
None of the horses ever showed any signs of colic or discomfort. And even though my back still really hurts, I am able to move both of my arms today. I do kind of wish I had some small bales of hay put aside for these cold snaps because they are a little bit easier to handle. But even though I'm feeding a large volume of this hay, the sled makes it so much easier. This morning, I definitely noticed that these boys were much happier than they had been the last couple of days. I don't know if it's because they could tell I wasn't feeling well or if they were just really happy that it was getting a little bit warmer, but a bunch of them were really interested in coming up to me and saying hello this morning. Even Gus, who was in a lot better spirits than he has been. Even little Gus was interested in investigating whether or not I had maybe a few spare treats for him this morning. These boys really made my day. It does take a ton of preparation and hard work to make sure that they stay healthy through one of these cold snaps, but it is definitely worth it when you make it out the other side and everybody is starting to get back to normal. I ended up finding one stray treat that I gave to little Gus. I think Stewy was probably a little bit jealous. As I headed into the barn, Stewy followed me. I think he wanted all the little alfalfa leaves that were left in the sled. I couldn't say no to this guy and I left him a little pile just for himself. As the weather started to warm up a little bit, I was interested in making sure that Tiny was okay. After a few days of sub-zero weather, she finally came out of the tack room. She had access to free choice food and warm water the whole time, and it took her a little while to stretch out all the kinks from sleeping for so many days in a row. On the coldest night, I thought about bringing her to my house so she could stay inside, but I think she would rather be at the barn. The only horse that didn't seem to mind the sub-zero temperatures was Scarlett. Last year she was just a tiny baby during the cold snap, but this year she thrived even though she stayed outside during the whole storm. She had a nice little straw bed that I saw her lay down in quite often. She did have a windbreak that I didn't even see her use, and she stayed pretty fresh and sassy the entire time. As this cold snap comes to an end and all of the horses get back to their regular shenanigans, I am really grateful that they got through the storm unscathed. The forecast shows us having some weather that is above freezing in a few days, and I cannot wait. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.